everybody. My name is Paige Peterson. I am a tour guide here at Lost River Cave, as well as the operations assistant. And we are here today with our chief naturalist, Delaney, and we're going to talk about bats just in time for Halloween.
All right, thank you, Paige. So I'm going to go on ahead and share my screen here. Give me just a second to get it set up. There we go. I do have a PowerPoint for us today about the bats, since, I can't really have a live bat with us, unfortunately. It'd be a lot more fun, I think, because you can get the actual ratio of the size of these little guys. I mean, they're quite tiny. But we're going to start with our most common bat that we see at the cave, which is the big brown bat. Now, the big brown bat, as you can see here, is brown. That's the name. We have some very clever names for our animals. But the big brown bat is the largest bat that we find in the cave, and it's actually the second largest bat in Kentucky, following the hoary bat. Now, the big brown bat comes in at about 0.81 ounces. That's how much they weigh, which is big for a bat, which tells you how small they are. Now, their average wingspan is about 12 inches, so they're pretty large animals when they actually have their wings out, but they're very lightweight for flight. Now, these critters have some really big teeth, if you can't tell by the picture, and that's because one of their favorite foods is beetles. They love to eat beetles. One of my favorite things to do, actually, in the early morning on the park is to walk underneath the streetlights and see what wings I can find on the ground. A lot of our bat species, like the big brown bat and the next couple bats that we're going to see, will actually hang out by the streetlights and eat the insects that are congregating there due to the light itself. But it's a really fun way to find neat wings like Luna moth wings and other moth wings, and then just like big beetle wings and that sort of stuff. Pretty fun. But the big brown bat does do maternity colonies. Not all bats do. These guys do. They will have a maternity colony, but they don't actually have a hibernaculum. So the difference between a maternity colony and a hibernaculum is where maternity colony is where all the females will get together. They'll have their pups, is what you call the baby bats. They'll have their pups, and they will kind of keep them in a congregated area where they can stay safe and kind of together in a community. Then the mothers will leave and feed, and then they'll come back and feed the pups. And that takes about a month to like 6 weeks, depending on the species, for the baby bat to become a pup, for the pup to actually become independent from the mother. So it's a pretty short turnaround time for a mammal. But with the hibernacula or the hibernaculum, they actually are like where all the bats can congregate to sleep together over winter. Big brown bats really don't do that. These guys do like to hibernate in caves. They are one of the few bats that do, and they enjoy areas of the cave that actually have a lot of temperature disturbance. Most bats don't. Most bats really like to have a really solid temperature in a specific range with a specific humidity, which is why a lot of bats are endangered, because a lot of caves are being closed off or being built over, or they're just unable to enter the cave anymore. There's been some sort of disturbance in the surface, which causes the change within the cave system. I mean, they're very specific organisms, but these guys, they don't care. They're the most common bat we see in the cave in the wintertime. They love to hang out near the cave mouth where we got a lot of air going in and out. They don't mind being over by the flow stones or anything like that. So we see these guys a lot, and they love to be in human structures. There's a theory, actually, that these guys are more prolific since humanity has kind of crept its way across the continent, and how we have made buildings and structures and stuff. And they're more prevalent than they used to be because they like to roost in human buildings. So this is actually one of the most common bats for people to see outside of, let's say, a cave setting or something like that. So they're pretty fascinating little organisms. They'll come in and hang out. You ever heard the term bats in your belfry? It's probably one of these guys. Now, our next bat species are tiny, like really tiny. The last one I saw was like the size of my thumb. Like literally the size of my thumb, and it's a little brown bat. These guys look very similar to the big brown bats, but the big thing that you're going to notice is the size difference between the two if you compared them, where the big brown bat kind of looks about like this big, the little brown bat's like this big. They're tiny. Now, these little guys, they're pretty cute. They weigh about 0.18 to 0.49 ounces, so they're little, they're very small. They have about an 8 to an 11-inch wingspan, so while they're small body, they still have a pretty big wingspan. The females can make small maternity colonies, little bitty ones. I'm like talking like 5 to 10 organisms, not the big ones like the big brown bats do. But these guys actually do go into a hibernacula. So they will congregate. And it's very cute whenever you do see them congregate in caves or in other places where they do hibernate, because they kind of like stack all together. It's like looking at a corn on the cob, you know, and all the kernels are stacked together. It's kind of what the bats look like. It's really adorable. But these guys, they're also insect eaters. All these bats that I'm going to talk about today are insectivores. And they'll eat just about anything that's small and they can fit in their mouth, which is pretty cool. Now, these guys are little workhorses when it comes to eating insects. They typically eat about half their body weight in insects a night. But when the females are actually raising pups, they can actually eat 110% of their body weight in insects a night. So these guys are little workhorses. They're fantastic to have around fields and crops and stuff. They're wonderful natural pest control. Now, I'm going to go ahead and scoot on to our next little bat, which is the tricolor bat. This is the most common bat in the cave. They prefer to be in areas that are kind of like the little brown bat, which I didn't talk about, but they prefer to be in areas that are going to have a constant temperature and a constant humidity. Now, we can see these guys in the upper passageways of the caves quite frequently. You see this one right here in the center has dew all over them. These are one of the only bats that really enjoy getting a nice dew coat on their fur while they're hibernating. I'm not 100% sure why, but it might have to do something with insulation. Now, they're called tricolor bats, not because they've got cute little pink forearms, which is one of the best ways to ID them, and their brown bodies and their little black wing membranes. It's not that. It's actually the hair itself. If you took one of the hair follicles and you put it up underneath a microscope, you would notice that it is banded 3 different colors, kind of a pale yellow tawny color towards the bottom, a darker tawny rust color towards the center, and a bit of a darker brown towards the tip. Can be more of a gray and olive color, but that's why they're called tricolor bats. Now, a lot of our people who are familiar with bats for, I don't know, like the past 20, 30 years, might actually know these guys by a different name. Instead of the tricolored bat, they might know them as the eastern pipistrelle. They were actually reclassified just to be more accurate to the species. So one of the most common names that people call these guys is actually little pips instead of, pipistrelle. So when you talk to somebody who's very familiar with bats or has been in cave business for a long time, they'll say pips most of the time. And that's what they're talking about, is one of these little guys. Now, they also do eat a lot of insects, just like the little brown bat. They have about the same taste in insects. They eat a lot of moths and that sort of thing. They're not as picky as the big brown bats are when it comes to different types of insects that they eat. Now, our eastern red bat, these guys are my favorite. They are just adorable. They're kind of fuzzy looking. All of these guys kind of look like fuzzy chicken nuggets, which is great, hanging from the cave ceiling. But these guys are just really, really cute in my opinion. So the eastern red bat is one of the biggest bats, and they're typically not cave-dwelling bats. They really aren't. They prefer to hang out in trees, especially riparian trees, such as sycamores, oaks, elms, box elders, that sort of thing, because that's camouflage for them. One of their biggest predators are owls. Owls will eat them quite frequently. So their best form of defense is actually camouflage. And these guys blend in very well with those tree species. These guys do not hibernate in caves. They're actually migratory. They will migrate further south in the wintertime. Not necessarily a huge migration like we're thinking like birds do, but they can migrate farther south. And they'll typically hibernate in like old rotted trees and that sort of thing, kind of in tree holes, the typical like where you think you're going to find an owl kind of place. Now, these particular critters are kind of mid-sized compared to our big brown bat and our little brown bat and our tricolor bat. They're a little bigger than the little brown and the tricolor. They're about 0.25 to 0.46 ounces each. They're just really fluffy, like really, really fluffy. They don't enjoy being around people. These guys like to be in sparsely populated areas. They love being in forested areas because mostly they hang out and roost in trees, which is pretty excellent. But every once in a while at the cave, we'll find them there in the summertime. Most bats that we see at the cave are going to be in the wintertime, but this is one of the bat species that we will see in the summer. And actually this big middle picture that you see here of the bat that's roosting, and you just see its back, I took that picture inside the cave. That was one of the bat species we see there. We typically don't bother the bats when we see them. You really shouldn't bother a roosted bat, especially in the wintertime. But this is during the summertime, and I was in there really quick to show one of our staff members some things. And I took the picture really quick, and then we left the little guy alone. So really quick about hibernation with our bats. Our bat species, when they hibernate, they have to gain a lot of fat in order to do that. This goes across the board. It goes for all these species. They have to gain a lot of fat over the winter. Most bats die within their first year because they didn't eat enough food, they didn't gain enough fat, and they couldn't survive the winter. They will be about 25% less, they have 25% less fat and less weight by the time they actually exit hibernation, which is where we come into something called white nose syndrome. Now, you guys have probably heard of white nose syndrome. It's very common in the United States, unfortunately. It came from Europe. It was probably brought over by a irresponsible caver, or a person that enjoys going in caves and enjoys wild caving. Now, that itself is not bad, but what they didn't do was clean their clothes between going in between caves, which you should always do. That's great cave practice. So they didn't clean their clothes. They went into a cave in New York and they deposited a fungus that now it was attracted to the bats there, and it's known as white nose syndrome. The scientific name is Geomyces destructions, and it attacks the bats. Now, during the summertime, it's not a problem. The bats clean themselves. They're nice and happy. They aren't really bothered by the fungus. It's wintertime when it's a big problem. So it grows in like cotton-like tufts on their exposed areas of like their faces and their ears and their wings. The areas aren't really furry, the places that they normally clean during the summertime. In the wintertime, it grows there. And if you can imagine growing fungus on your skin, it's going to itch. So what they'll do is they'll twitch and they'll move and they'll just be moving a whole lot in the wintertime, which is bad when you're trying to hibernate and you're trying to conserve energy. So it's keeping their metabolism up. It's keeping them awake. They keep waking up during wintertime, and there's no food because all these guys are insectivores. They can't eat, so they literally starve to death. And that is what white nose is doing to kill them. There's a lot of research going into trying to stop it, but the best practices that we have right now, if you've ever been to Mammoth Cave, you might have noticed that they have you walk on those mats filled with 409, the cleaning detergent, that kills the fungus. So that's typically what most people do if you're going to go to a show cave, is you walk through the mats and stuff, and it will kill the fungus on your shoes. That way you don't carry it to another cave if you visit another cave in the area. Now, Lost River Cave's a little different because, we're on a boat, so we don't necessarily have to worry about that. Additionally, we don't go anywhere that there's typically going to be bats, that they're going to be in the same contact as the area that we are. Like humans aren't touching the rocks that they're going to be on, that sort of thing. So there's no way for us to transfer it to them. We've not documented it in our cave. Doesn't mean it's not there, but it's not been documented yet inside the cave system, because a lot of bats don't hibernate in our cave because our cave floods. And typically it's not a great idea to hibernate in a cave that floods. But if you do wild caving, one of the best practices is cleaning your clothes between caves and when you're going into different caves. So wash them every time, everything you wear into the cave, and use about a cup of 409 in your washing machine with your clothes, and that will kill the possibility of any of the white nose syndrome on your clothing. So that's a long talk about that, but that's really all I've got today, Paige. So unless you guys or you have any specific questions, Paige, that's really all I've got.
I don't think so. I think there is a big brown bat in the cave right now that we've been seeing. So, and that makes sense when you were talking about where they live.
Mm-hmm.
So awesome. Thanks so much, Delaney.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here today.